Hi, everyone. I am Rebecca from ChemKnits, and I'm here today in another live stream. I think this makes about 3 in 24 hours. But today we are going to unravel these sock blanks that I dyed with a snow dyeing technique in our last snowstorm. Now, with any luck, we will get some snow today here in Massachusetts, so that way I can do some more snow dyeing and snow exploration. But I didn't really want to wait much longer to unravel these blanks. So I am really, really excited to check it out and see what is happening. Now, hopefully, ooh, okay, hopefully that the um, quality is fine on here. Um, if there are any issues, please let me know. Where do I see? Huh. Hi, nice to see you again. I'm glad you were able to join. Good. Okay. Um, I just needed to double check that things were in fact working. But if you guys notice any issues or anything, please just let me know, and I will let you know in the chat that I am still here. Sometimes, even though I'm right next to my router, things can be finicky. So we'll see if hopefully in the morning this will all go through all right. So the video for the dyeing of these two blanks, and I've got one commercial knit pick sock blank. The link so you could purchase these blanks for yourself is in the video description. And then one homemade blank, which I've shown how to do in a couple videos. This one was made out of 100% Wool of the Andes worsted weight yarn. And you can see that it does have, a little mistake where I had some dropped stitches going on. But since I'm planning to unravel the blank, it's not really that big a deal. But what's cool about this is that on the front side, you see the rainbow gradient. Well, okay, so I should get into how I dyed these blanks. There's some pictures on my Facebook page and Instagram, but I created these blanks by doing some snow dyeing. So I laid them both onto like a cookie cooling rack, covered it with snow, and then covered the snow with dry Kool-Aid. So then we got these patterns as the snow melted and allowed the food coloring to deposit onto the yarns. And I think that it is so cool how much more vivid the colors are on the superwash nylon blend than they are on the 100% wool, because the food coloring just struck this so much faster that we ended up with white patches. Whereas we've got much, much more coverage on the worsted weight wool because the dye kind of spread through and didn't really set completely until I heated it. Yeah, now I know that morning ones can be hard, but yeah, I guess you guys should tell me which one you think I should unravel first, the worsted weight or the sock one, and then I'll start unraveling. But what's cool about this is that you see the gradient on one side, but the other side, it's like the purple went through in a really, really cool way. So it's kind of like we've got a gradient on one side and then purple on the back. So what I'm curious to see is when we're unraveling this one, do we have like, a solid blue and green section and then a solid-ish purple section, or do we see some like speckling and stuff in there too? So I am really, really excited to unravel both of these actually. And the best part about dyeing blanks is that there's so many possibilities. And when I was setting up the snow dyeing, I started to be a little concerned that maybe it would be boring because, I was like, oh, it's just going to be a rainbow gradient. But I was so, so surprised. And then the sock blank one is so cool. But look at the back. There's not full color penetration all the way through the blank, which if you think about it is really cool because this sat under melting colored water for 5 hours and it was already pre-soaked. And so the dye struck, it couldn't get through, I guess, maybe 4 layers of yarn completely. And so if you think about it, that is really, really cool. But all right, I see a vote for doing the sock blank one first. So we'll start there. And you two start in the red. So when I did this, and the video for the dyeing will come out during there we go. The video for the dyeing of this yarn will come out during the sock blank special dye along. I think this is no, this isn't the Dye Pot Weekly episode this week. This is just a bonus video during that wink. Yeah, no, I think this came out way, way cooler than I expected. There's no way I could have gotten this pattern with hand painting. And so I used, in the video, I'll talk about how many packets of each color I used. But I think I used 3 packets of yellow, and it kind of disappeared behind the green and the orange. So I thought that was pretty interesting. But I like to start off these blanks just with one end, and I take the 2 ends of the yarn, and I will put them into my PVC pipe Niddy Noddy. And on my last video, someone told me that I should rotate one of the sides of the Niddy Noddy. I have this in sort of an H configuration versus the more typical Niddy Noddy configuration. And the reason why I do this is because I am unwinding 2 skeins of yarn at a time. And if I was going to try to unravel 2 skeins of yarn at a time onto here, I think that I might get them tangled together. So this just will allow me to keep the 2 skeins of yarn separated as we unravel it. And so let's kind of put it over there and scooch back. But, you know, it's pretty amazing like how matched these sock blanks are. And in the last stream where I unraveled a blank, you saw how frustrated it was because it kept getting twisted together. But thankfully, that's not a problem that I have with these worsted weight with these commercial Knit Picks blanks. It's because I think they must start, rather than starting from a center pull ball. I mean, obviously, commercially made sock blanks won't start from a center pull ball. But I think that they have 2 separate cones of yarn that they're going from. And so they don't get twisted together. And so you can really just kind of keep unraveling like this. And it's pretty easy. So what I like is that even in these more solid rows, we still see some like little specks of white in there. And I think that that's because we don't have color penetration all the way through the blank. And this is just one reason why these stroll blanks are really, really awesome. But I understand that, you know, buying one of these blanks can be a little expensive and why you might not want to. And so that's why in the sock blank special dye along, I am planning to use a lot of homemade blanks so that way I'm planning to use a mixture so that way you can see how the techniques that we do on these commercial blanks can kind of translate to something that you might make yourself. And yeah, but I think I recommend if you're going to make on, you know, a knitting machine your own sock blank, I greatly, greatly, greatly recommend now starting with 2 separate balls of yarn versus the way I showed in the video. And I'm going to be updating that soon. But you can see just how easy this is unraveling. I mean, I'm not really doing much. I have my, you know, my hand inserted kind of like I'm going to do a long tail cast on. And then I'm just wrapping this around my Niddy Noddy. And you can see that even, you know, we have some flecks of orange starting to show up, which maybe you can't see, but they're on both strands because we really are getting 2 identical 50-gram skeins of yarn out of this blank. And I think that that is really, really cool. Kind of move it up so you can see. But yeah, how are you guys all doing this morning? You guys having fun? Yeah, let me know if there's any stream issues. I've got the chat popped up on my main screen, but it's not showing me if there's any interruptions. So All right, now we're moving into the orange. And what I can do today that I was having a little more trouble with the other day is sort of create, well, how was I doing that the other time? Did I move it out and go inward? Just to kind of show the gradient as I'm unwinding it. Huh. I should have paid more attention if I am going towards the outside, because when I'm splitting it with my fingers, it's hard to get too wide. So I should pay attention. Um, you're gonna go for a motorbike ride, but you got snowed in. Yikes! Yeah, it has not started. We got like a tiny bit of snow yesterday, and I got all excited, and then it stopped. But we are supposed to get snow later today, so pickup for the kids might be difficult. So if you've seen the video where I did the blanks that I dyed with the color mist sprays, we're seeing something semi-similar to that here, in that we're seeing, speckling of color a bit, but we've got much bigger splotches of color here than we did when I used the color mist sprays. Because although the penetration isn't even all the way through, there are larger sections of color here. Also, the way that the colors are distributed on this blank, it's not even. So since this is a more tie-dyed blank versus something that I hand painted and used a little more control over the colors sections in the yarn itself aren't going to be even, but we're still going to have a really, really cool rainbow gradient. You can see here that we're getting, that you're going to have some mixtures of the orange and green in this section because you see both of the orange and green in one round. We've got I don't want to brush my teeth tantrum going on right now. Yeah, well, oh gosh. So we have Amazon Fresh. And I ordered, knowing that the snow was coming, I ordered milk and all kinds of groceries so that way I didn't have to go to the store today. Well, they only delivered one of the 3 totes, and it did not have the milk I needed. So I started off my day with a very angry phone call to get my refunds. And so I'll probably have to run to the store after this to try to fight the crowds to get some milk, or else my kids will not be happy with me later. But at school today, they're actually having animals come in. I guess they've been doing so this is a preschool, they've been doing an animal unit. And I guess some company is bringing like little bunnies and chicks and maybe baby ducks and maybe goats and stuff to the school. So I have no idea how this is going to work, but I cannot wait to get pictures. I asked the teachers to take some videos because this is, I think, going to be the most adorable thing I've ever seen. When you dye, how do you clean your hands? Have you tried lava soap? I've never tried lava soap before. I usually wear gloves as I'm dyeing because that way I don't dye my hands in the first place. I do have a special soap that I got from Dharma Trading that I'm sort of blanking on the name of it right now, but it's supposed to help you get dye off of your fingers. But usually within a couple washings, the food coloring does come off. But I haven't done like something horribly dyeing. They canceled Fresh in your area? Oh, that's a bummer. Who knows if they'll cancel it here because I keep calling and complaining, but I did place a replacement order for tonight, and if it does not show up, then I told the manager I spoke to on the phone that I was going to cancel Fresh because they keep messing up our orders, and I like the convenience of not having to be home when they make the delivery. So you can have a delivery show up between 4 and 6 a.m. and then have the groceries there for breakfast. But they didn't have a good reason for why they only left a third of our order here this morning and why they didn't bother giving us the rest. So that was annoying. Yeah, well, at least if tomorrow's a snow day, my kids don't go to school on Thursdays, but I don't think we're supposed to get that much, so I don't even know if I'll get a call to do an early pickup. But here is where we are on our gradient with our colors. And so it's It's really, really pretty. With this one, you know, unlike some of the other blanks where maybe I've dyed a more wild pattern, on this one it's easier to sort of visualize what it might turn into with patches of green and white or like whatever color in white. Um, but I was still super, super excited to see it. And now we really have a comparison of how much easier it is to unravel these blanks versus the homemade one that I did from the center pole ball, which I am no longer doing the center pole ball thing at home. Uh, the the one reason why this might be taking me a tad longer is I'm trying to wind it in such a way so that way you can see the gradient while it's still on the niddy noddy. And so if I weren't caring about that, I could go even faster. But I think in this one, I'm a lot more excited to unravel the worsted weight blank just because I don't really know what to expect from it. I am so curious to see, since one side of the blank is one color and one side is the other, a different color, because the homemade blank I cranked in the round, and this commercial stroll blank, it was knit flat. So that's the main difference there. But I just, even with minimal yellow, I think that this is still really, really pretty. Oh. But yeah, I'm excited to create more with all of these sock blanks that just arrived yesterday. So if we get more snow, someone in the ChemKnits lab group on Facebook did some snow dyeing and they added sprinkles on as well. And so now I really want to do some snow dyeing with sprinkles. And the nice thing about getting something, you know, trying this kind of experiment, if the results are underwhelming, it doesn't really matter because you can always over dye your blank. So if I try the sprinkle experiment and just end up with sort of a boring blank with very little color on it that I'm not a fan of, then, well, you know, we'll over dye it and dip dye it in something and get something cool. So what did I dye this? This one I dyed with Kool-Aid. So I pre-soaked the blanks, put them on top of a cookie like cooling rack so that way water could go through, cover them with snow. And then I covered the snow with a rainbow gradient of Kool-Aid. And I think I used, I don't know if I used 15 packets of Kool-Aid. I used a lot because I wanted to go for some intense colors. And I know that with the green and the blue and the yellow, I need more packets than I do of the red just because of the intensity of the colors from using them in the past. And yeah, but I mean, look at how, oh, come on, guys, how much more intense these colors are here than they are on the 100% wool. So I think even when I, you know, hand paint side by side, I can usually get similar depths of color, even if I see the color stripes faster to the stroll than the wool of the Andes. But in this case, the thing that's really different is that the dye was slowly being applied to the yarn over the span of hours. So since the dye kind of bound to the sock yarn right away, we got these really intense colors. Whereas on here, some of the dye didn't stick and just kind of dripped through, and that's why the colors aren't quite as intense. Now with the grape Kool-Aid, you can see some blue sort of around it. And this is not completely breaking that we're seeing. I did add some, I added some blue Kool-Aid mixed in with the grape to try to make a bluer purple. But you can see that like a lot of the reds, it almost looks red because the reds from the grape Kool-Aid really struck the blank, and some of the blues just, you know, passed through because I think that some of the area was saturated with dye. But yeah, these blanks are a lot of fun. But yeah, you can see how quickly this one is going. And I think that if you had like auto ball winders or something, If you had two of them, you could just kind of hold it and set them going and it would unravel in a jiffy. And that would be pretty cool. But I think I don't really have everything that I have is somewhat manual at this stage. But I've also done, so I have not done snow dyeing with Jacquard acid dyes or anything yet. And I think that you could do it. I just am personally a little hesitant to use the powders just because you worry about, I mean, I think you should worry about inhalation when it comes to Kool-Aid as well, but the particles are larger in the Kool-Aid than they are in the Jacquard acid dyes. So I think that's why there's more of a risk if you're going to use those to decorate the snow. But I think if you're, I mean, that's something that I would maybe do in, say, like a garage or outside. But then I might try it, say, with ice dyeing in the summer. So that way I can set it up on my driveway, do it all outside, and let it go versus doing it in my house. Hello, welcome, welcome. But you can tell, like, you know, what are some of my favorite things to dye? And rainbows are definitely, definitely high up there. I love a good rainbow. But this shows, so again, this is not quite the same and controlled as the when I use the color mist sprays. But we still have a lot of speckling and splotching of color here. And so you can get really, really cool results like that even without using those color sprays. So I think that's fun. I wonder if you pre-dyed it blank with a solid color and over-dyed it with speckles. Absolutely, you could do that. I haven't done that with a blank. I did do that in the first episode of Dye Pot Weekly. I did some speckling with dry Kool-Aid. So I over-dyed the yarn a pretty pale sort of mint color. And then I used two different colors of Kool-Aid, dry Kool-Aid, and sort of tapped it onto the yarn to see if I would get speckles. And it worked, you know, really, really nicely, actually. And, well, especially on the stroll yarn where the colors struck faster. And so there's no reason why you couldn't do something similar with a blank. Or even versus over dyeing, you could dip dye, hand paint a gradient, and then add, you know, sprinkles or Kool-Aid, or do acid dye speckles or whatever it is you might desire. Hello. Oh, this yarn is so pretty. I love a good rainbow. I wish that uh, some of the yellows, like that the yellow didn't get overtaken by the other colors, but that's sort of also the fun of snow dyeing, is that you don't know exactly what you're going to get. Save a tub of snow in your freezer, then you can snow dye in the summer. I mean, I think that you could use crushed ice for a very, very similar effect as with snow. I think ice cubes would give a different effect entirely, because especially on, say, I mean, I'd love to do ice cubes on a blank. Because since they are like a more solid piece of ice, the melt will kind of go around the ice cubes. So you could end up with like circular patches of color on the blank if you were going to do that. If you were using a blank. If you're using a yarn, a skein of yarn, I don't know quite what you would get from dyeing with ice cubes, because I have not yet tried that. You could also make Kool-Aid ice cubes and freeze them and then put them on. Sort of like, I guess that would be similar to when I dyed with popsicles. That yarn was cool. I actually have some of those like plastic freezy pops that I've been meaning to use to dye some yarn. They're frozen in my freezer, ready to go. I just haven't used them yet. So yeah, the first time in this whole skein I'm struggling is now when we're just like a couple inches from the end. So I think that when I'm doing this, the tension on one strand is a little off from the other, so one ends up being a bit longer than the other. But we are just about done. Ow, my hip. Sometimes I feel like I'm getting old, and getting old comes with some new pains. Um, and I'm only 34. I'm not that old yet, but I injured my hip. Gosh, maybe a year ago I slipped on a Lego, and it still gives me trouble sometimes, annoyingly. And of course, when I had my annual physical this year, it's like, well, I was having hip problems, but it's all better now. And then it sometimes comes back. And so I was like, well, I missed that chance. So right now, because I'm reaching the end and the blanket itself kind of won't stay on my couch anymore and let me pull from it, I'm letting gravity help me unravel it as I'm getting towards this end. But you can see our yarn is super cool. Super, super cool. Go. But, it's the fun thing with snow dyeing is that, even though so with the worsted weight yarn, I laid that in thirds as I was doing the snow dyeing. But I knew that I wouldn't have like 3 repeats of something that were the same. So I wouldn't be able to use that to make something identical. Because the way and the pattern that the dye, even from, what is this, like 3 inches from one 3-inch section to the next could be different. But these 2 skeins were dyed in the exact same setup and look so different. And so that's what's really, really fun about using these double-stranded sock blanks, is that, when you unravel it, you're going to get identical yarns. But look at how cool some of these specs are. One of these I'm slightly ahead of one strand than the other in this unraveling, but they're still identical. And even in a homemade one, if you make some mistakes and things end up being slightly off with the yardage. Oh yeah, I need to weigh the skeins from the homemade ones that I made. But so even if they're a tiny bit off from one another, you're still going to end up with a really nice matched pair of socks. So that is fun. Your mom is 96 and doesn't think that's old enough to be called old lady. Hey, that's awesome. I've known 3 relatives to be over 100. With my aunt, we did a huge 99th birthday party and all the family came out. And then we had an even bigger 100th birthday party. And yeah, but one of my uncles, like she and her siblings, I guess there were 6 or maybe 6 of them, that maybe there was a baby. Anyway, 3 of them lived to be over 100. So that was pretty impressive. See, if I wasn't concerned about maintaining my gradient, this would be a little easier right now. But I love we've just got the not very much left over here. I love being able to see it all sort of laid out. It's a lot easier to maintain your gradient on the Nitty Naughty when you are only winding one strand of yarn at a time. But yeah, but I wonder how my kids are going to react. With the 2-year-old, I was like, Ryder, you're going to see animals today. And he's like, yes, animals. Or animals. And I'm like, no, you don't understand. You're going to see real animals at school today. I almost wish that this is exciting enough that they invited kids that don't normally go on Wednesdays to stop by. And so part of me was like, oh, I kind of want to stop by and see the puppies and stuff. But they've made all the classrooms to be a different habitat right now. So my older son, his classroom is a jungle. The younger one, his classroom's a forest. And the 2-year-old went and visited a room that was the Arctic, and they made an igloo out of paper, and it's just so cool. They had an ice fishing section, and they've had matching sensory tables and stuff. It's just a lot of fun. So let's all shoot for 100. Oh yes. I hope, if I hit 100, I will still be dyeing yarn. But so here is our snow dyed gradient. And you see, I love when the colors sort of mix. So with the grape at the top, you've got some purple and blue. And it's a really, really pretty rainbow. And I think that you can make something really, really awesome out of this yarn. But that's what's like really fun about the blanks, is that you don't need to worry about the even penetration on the other side, because that just means you're going to end up with some cool white specks. Unless you don't want white specks, then you might want something else. But good morning. Welcome, welcome. So I think that, this could turn into something really, really pretty. And yeah, I'm going to start in a minute. I will start unraveling this worsted weight blank that matches, but I'm going to take a brief break for some water, and I am going to place a quick ad in now, and then we'll start unraveling the next blank. Excuse me. Not everyone will necessarily see the ad, but I think it gives it to like some people depending on the region and stuff. I'll answer those questions in a sec. I want to make sure that people are back. Now that it tells me in some of the ways that I set it up, it tells me when the commercial break is done, and some it doesn't really. So, all right, but I'm going to assume that people are back right now. So the stream has been going for about half an hour. And so it took me, trying to maintain the gradient. So using extra care, it took a little under half an hour to unwind this blank. And yes, I did just with the ends tie them off. And so I'm going to wet this and let it dry on the Knitting Naughty probably. And then I will use the other ends to tie it off as well. No, I do not get to choose the type of ads at all. YouTube chooses the ads, and they choose who sees the ad. I think someone said that maybe only like people in the US see them. I don't really know. They have some algorithm when they decide who gets shown what ad, and usually they have nothing to do with me or my content. I get a lot of, on my own, when I'm watching videos myself, I get a lot of car commercials, which are pretty random, but you're gonna leave for work? Yeah. Oh, good. I'm glad that I was able to finish it before you had to leave. And you'll be able to catch the rest on the replay if you'd like. You made a Nitty Nutty like yours. Yeah, I think I spell it with N's, so Niddy, but I have no idea if that's like proper. I've seen people use it with do the spelling with the K's as well. Oh, funny. You got a craft related ad. Yeah, I think like when I started using ads, they were often like, there were a lot of knitting related ads on my site, but then they've changed. The whole model has changed in the last, well, goodness, now almost, it's not quite 10 years, but approaching 10 years. And the models have all changed so that I think ads are now more tailored to you personally, which is why like if you visit ChemKnits, you might see items that you were looking at on Amazon or Gap or whatever, because they're like, ooh, if we show you these again, you might buy them. Yeah, the PVC pipe, it's great because it was like $6, and then I can modify it so I can make it long so that way I can do this. I only have right now, I think 4 of the short sections for the ends, but I can modify the length. I could make technically I could make this bar 4 feet long. That would be a lot harder for me to wind, but I could do it. Yeah, so again, like, when I do an ad break, not everyone, they won't show up for everyone, but if they do show up, thank you for watching, because the ads are part of what keep this all going. Okay, so here, before I start this worsted blank, I want to see if I can show. Okay, this is sort of the side that was up after I finished the snow dyeing. Let's see if I can hold it. There we go. But then the reverse side is a lot of purple. Isn't that cool? So it was like the grape just kind of went, it's almost like you can see it the way that it melted down the side. So we have these sections like right here that's green on one, green and blue on one side, and then purple on the other. So I'm really, really curious what this will end up looking like when we unravel it. Do you have any plans to sell the fabulous yarns you produce? No, that's a great, great question. I do have plans to at some point do some kind of de-stash sale because some yarns I obviously have to keep because I love them so, so much. But, I just sent out a lot of the yarn that I dyed from the Kickstarter campaign last fall, and the yarn is starting to build up again. So I will at some point probably do, and I'm not planning to have a regular shop that I update, weekly or even necessarily monthly. But once the yarn starts to accumulate, I might, kind of do like a de-stash sale to help sort of fund more materials so I can do more dyeing. I'm glad that you enjoy them. Thank you so much. I try to show exactly what is going on and stuff. So, whoops, there's a knot there that I want to make sure I get out. You have the wooden ones are lovely, but you worry that wrapping the wet yarn will make them swell. Yeah, I also, when I first started out, I worried about, they were also just more expensive. So I wanted to see, is there another way? Okay, so this is a homemade blank. And if you've watched any of my homemade blank videos that I make on a knitting machine like this, just like a kid's crank knitting machine. But I like to, rather than doing a proper bind off, I just sort of pull the stitches through at the end just to kind of hold them. So then, I can start unraveling. But you can see the yarn is crimpy as you unravel it. So you could, if you're going to knit from a blank, you could knit directly from a double-stranded blank, or you could knit directly from, a homemade single-stranded or double-stranded blank too. It's just, the yarn might be crimpy. So if you're going to save them in skein form like I like to, oh, come on. That didn't undo it? Now I'm determined to get this knot out. Yeah, so if you're going to want to store them in skein form, I prefer to unravel it or to soak it a little bit before, there we go, letting it dry, just because I want to, just sort of relax the crimp, because I find that the crimp can sort of otherwise get tangled. I see you use vinegar all the time, but not citric acid. How much citric acid is enough? That is a great question, and one I don't really have an answer to. Using citric acid in the videos is something that I have been meaning to do for a while. I just haven't gotten there yet. It's on my list of something to do, some like citric acid and vinegar comparisons going forward. The one time I do use citric acid is in this project. This was citric acid based because the Kool-Aid packets contain enough citric acid in them to dye the yarn. So I did not use any vinegar in this setup. But if I'm going to be using food coloring and snow dyeing, I pre-soak the yarn in a vinegar solution and then add the dye to it. So you've read for a 1/4 tablespoon for 100 grams. But the thing to keep in mind with vinegar and citric acid is that the volume, either, in terms of like teaspoons and stuff, the volume isn't as important as the concentration. So if you're going to be pre-soaking, 100 grams of yarn in 100 gallons of water, you know, a quarter teaspoon isn't going to be enough. But a quarter teaspoon potentially in 8 to 12 cups of water might be sufficient. But I haven't tested it. But if you think about one packet of Kool-Aid has enough citric acid in it that I can add a bunch of other food coloring and dye yarn. And so, you know, how much citric acid is there in one packet of Kool-Aid? Probably not too much. So it helps the dye strike better, but you also don't use food dyes. Yeah, I mean, I think that I mainly use vinegar because I started out with it, and I find that for people starting out, it's a little easier to find vinegar in person than citric acid. But who knows? Maybe, I mean, citric acid can be really cheap. I have a lot because I make like the fizzy bath balls and stuff. So I have citric acid in my house. I just, you know, I think that I'm pretty comfortable with the amount of vinegar that I need to add, that I'm just so used to it that to start using citric acid, I need to like intentionally go and say like, all right, I'm going to film a bunch of videos where we're only using citric acid and no vinegar. So that's something that I need to do. Yeah. You use 4 teaspoons per quart of water. That's for the soak, and then a tablespoon to a pound of yarn. Yeah. So, you know, there's a lot of options. I found that, you know, adding the times when I found the amount of vinegar that I add really makes more of the difference is when I'm going to be doing some of the breaking violet. I find that if I have a little less vinegar in the pot, so the pH is a little bit higher, I can get a little more extreme breaking because the blue food coloring needs a lot more acid. It needs a more acidic environment to bind than the reds. So it's easier to get a more extreme gradient at a slightly, when you start off with a slightly higher pH, so less vinegar. So it's all ultimately, you know, it's something that and I'm sure that, you know, if you start playing around with citric acid, you know, a bunch of you are sharing how much you use. And so you figure it out just from experience and what works and what doesn't. But I have been known to dye something with Kool-Aid, exhaust the dye, and then reuse that cleared water with other food colorings to use the citric acid over and over when I've been doing a lot of dyeing in one day. So yes, but so far the citric acid has not been measured by me. Can you use too much of the acid source? I mean, I think if you add a lot, then you risk the dyes crashing out, which the red number 3 can be finicky. But I don't think you could really use too much. I think that if you start to use too much, it's just more of a wasteful situation. I don't think you could use too much citric acid or vinegar that you could damage the yarn if you're dealing with wool. Now, there are some fibers that are a little more finicky. So yarn with stellina, maybe if you use too much, have the conditions too acidic, maybe that will make it duller. I've heard I don't have any experience with this. It's just anecdotally what I've heard from people. Yeah, I used way too much vinegar when breaking violet and the red crashed out. Yeah, so now if you see my more recent videos, when I'm making my dye pot, I will add the vinegar to the dye pot, heat it up, add the dye, and then immediately start dip dyeing. And that minimizes the amount of red that crashes out. But now let's unravel this homemade blank, which it's funny because it's unraveling like easily, but it like wants to come along with me for the ride. Vinegar comes in bigger packages. Yeah, so vinegar can be a little harder to store. Well, okay, so I've heard both people say both things now, that you shouldn't use citric acid with stellina yarn, or you should only use citric acid with stellina yarn. So I think that like Wool to Dye For has some suggestions on their site, and I don't remember what they recommend. I think that it's also just paying attention to the quantities of dye as well. Yeah, so I'm trying to think. I have dyed some stellina yarn with Kool-Aid, but I don't think I still have it in my possession. And I have a sense that when it comes to Stellina and citric acid. So with citric acid, you can, you can get a more acidic solution than you can get with vinegar, ultimately. And speaking in like the broad tones. So it's possible that with citric acid, you could get too low of a pH. So too much, make it too acidic, and that could damage the Stellina fibers. And so that could be a reason why they caution, because it would be harder to get as low a pH with vinegar. So you learned the hard way. So yeah, maybe. But again, maybe it's. I have trouble seeing that it has something to do with the citric acid itself, and I would imagine that it has more to do with the overall pH. But I will take that to heart. Okay, cool. We didn't get super tangled. All right, so now right here, we're in one of these first, purple on one side, blue on the other. And well, actually, you can see and look on the inside. I'll like kind of fold this over a bit. What's really funny is that there's a tiny bit of purple on the blue side, but really, that's so cool that it's like, even though this is 2-layer fabric that was right on top of each other, we really basically have one color on one side and one on the other. So yes, this one is one strand, which is why I'm winding it sort of in my more typical nitty-knotty configuration here. This was just one strand. I have some double-stranded worsted blanks that I plan to dye during the stock blank special. As I pop a leg off of my knitting machine. So you can, and I did, make a double-stranded worsted weight and a double-stranded DK weight on this machine. However, the machine really struggled, and sometimes, like, you could feel that it was causing the gears to skip because it was just too much. There was just too much tension, and I think the hook size, they're really not made to do something bulkier than worsted. So doubling up worsted or DK was a little too much for this plastic machine to handle. So you can do it, but it was a lot more frustrating, and I had concerns that I would ruin this knitting machine by doing it. So the recommendation is you can try, but know that you risk damaging the machine. But double-stranded fingering weight does great, and I had no issues. But I am so amused by these double color sections. I can't really get over it. Yeah. So, but again, if using vinegar with Stellina makes it so that you don't, if that's what it takes and you know that it doesn't make it dull, then that's great. But I mean, I did, and maybe there's just not that much citric acid in Kool-Aid, but I definitely used dry Kool-Aid and speckled a Stellina yarn. And I didn't observe, I didn't do all over color, but I didn't observe any issues. So, yeah, but so you can see where I struggled with in the recent live stream with the double-stranded homemade blank, the struggle was not in the unraveling of it. So the unraveling, like, the yarn is coming off this, no problem at all. And we're getting, some really cool, not that you can see too well, but we're getting some fun just patches of color in this yarn. But the issue when I made the double-stranded blank from a center pull ball was that the two strands of yarn sort of wrapped around one another. So, and because of that, that made it trickier to unravel. But so far we've gone through, I sort of divided this in thirds. So we've got, and they actually don't all go in the same direction because of the way that it was folded. So it's not even 3 like repeats, but it's sort of a rainbow gradient that goes from purple to red, back to purple, back to red, in a way that is fun. So, but yeah, this is where we are right now. And again, the vibrancy difference is just extreme. And you can, and it's not because you can't dye wool in colors that intense. I have dyed wool with Kool-Aid in colors that are as intense as the Stroll blank, the Stroll yarns that we unraveled already. But it's really here more about the fact that that it's just the speed at which the dye strikes, and because we did the snow dyeing, it was so much further. So here's another section where we have one color on one side and then sort of two colors on the other. So let's take a peek at the inside. And again, with the inside of the blank, I'm just amazed. I would have thought you would see more of the purple come on here because they were touching each other. But there's really not a lot of bleeding of the color from one side to the other. And so that's really cool. I actually want to make sure I sort of snap a picture of this, a couple pictures of this to insert into the video itself. Because I think that this is so cool. Okay, I'll do something with that. I mean, I could take something from the live stream, but I just wanted to make sure I can remember to say in the video that happened. But I think that I was just so surprised when I picked up the blank and saw the color on the other side. So, So there's a little knot, but it just sort of undid itself. And the other thing that from making this homemade blank, and I guess I've gone through the real problem area that I had at one point, but sometimes you might, if you start on, technically you could unravel either any of these blanks from either end. So you could undo the end that you started with and unravel from there. The place where this will become problematic is if you had some mistake sections and sort of picked up stitches weird, you will have trouble unraveling it from the beginning side because once you get there, it'll kind of become a bit of a mess. So that's why another reason why I just pull the stitches through. It helps me determine which end I need to start unraveling from, especially if the blank itself was not a perfect one. I know you have not dyed repeatable colorways, but who does or who teaches it? I don't have a great recommendation for you right now. I mean, in terms of the sock blanks, I mean, I do have, and I guess, what do you mean by a repeatable colorway? Because when you hand paint the yarn and you have like sections of one color, you can get a repeating pattern there. So I'm not sure if you mean like repeating as in self-striping, or what. So if you could clarify that question, I can chat a bit about it. So I have not done a full self-striping yarn yet. I definitely plan to at some point. And I do plan to do some more self-striping, or to not necessarily self-striping, but to dye some more striped blanks and unravel them to see how, I guess, well, not how clean, but more of how unclean the color progressions are. But I've also I've seen some people on Ravelry that will do, they'll make a really long I-cord and use that to do self-striping yarn. Or you can use and this is why I want to make a warp board. You can wind a bunch of mini skeins and tie them off and then dye the mini skeins in a way so you can make a self-striping yarn. Well, there is there's a 40 stitch knitting machine for $70 and 50% off. Where? I forget how many. So it's definitely not 40. 2, 3, 4. Yeah, 22 or 23, I think. So, but yeah, 50% off knitting machine is good. Yeah, so self-striping is something that I want to start exploring more of. I think, and I've actually been thinking of even just winding mini skeins instead of trying. I mean, I want Keith to. We're talking about a design for a work board, but I think if I had, when I was winding mini skeins for the Kickstarter, I used a niddy noddy in sort of an H configuration, but just a 1 foot one, and I'd wind it around and then tie them off. And so I could probably do that to make a bunch of mini skeins to make a self-striping yarn. And so that's something that I've been intending to do for a while, and that maybe I need to move up the queue to see how it goes. But yeah, I mean, I think that this is kind of, the way the gradient's coming out is pretty fun. The Addie King are 40 stitches. Oh, I'm so glad. I'm glad that you guys enjoy watching me. Well, I mean, yeah, I guess I hope if you're on the live stream, then that means that you enjoy watching me. Otherwise, it's not as fun. Oh, it's the Addie King size. It's 40% off. That would be cool. I'd like. It's funny. I just bought. I have an older Singer knitting machine, and I just got this newer one. But actually, the ones that I'm eyeing right now are some of the used Ultimate Sweater machines on YouTube, or not on YouTube. I'm eyeing them on eBay. Yeah, and again, here's another one of those. We've got purple on one side, green on the other. On the inside of the blank, I didn't know. And I think if I was trying to hand paint the yarn, there's no way I would be able to intentionally do this. But something about the purple was wicking down just one piece of fabric. I think that is so cool. Aw, thank you guys. Well, you guys, and your comments and feedback and questions make this a lot of fun. And you really push me to try new things, and sometimes the suggestions that you make really, really inspire the next project. So please never hesitate to comment and give feedback, because it really, really does help. Yeah, so what's funny is that this one isn't necessarily self-striping because some of the sections have multiple colors, but and it's not a full gradient either. But you could get like a really cool hat, and some of these color sections, there is, a gradient type thing going on here, with the rainbow going back and forth. So I think that this could turn into something really, really fun. I think if I was going to knit with this yarn, I would be inclined to do a hat or something, just because, well, I knit a lot of hats because they're useful. But I think that, I like hats with asymmetric colorways. But you could also do some really fun fingerless mitts or something, even though they wouldn't necessarily match because it's not, an identical repeat going all the way through. But I think that you could get something really nice and not, it wouldn't repeat, but they would be coordinated enough. Whereas some gradients, some really long gradients, if you were going to use it for 2 socks or something, you might not have colors. You might have a gradient that's continuous through, but you might have any of the same colors in the pair. So there'll be less of a matched. But yeah, it's a very, very pretty rainbow and extremely different. Like, these were dyed again. These were dyed at the same time, and yet they are very, very different colorways. Yes, it's a very like pastel-y one. It's funny because the colors on this actually sort of remind me a little bit of the kind of colors that you get when you dye a wool acrylic blend, because you get a more pastel color versus vibrant. But you guys have seen in other videos how vibrant of colors I can get on this 100% wool of the Andes yarn with Kool-Aid. right now it's really from this technique that, and I think that the Dye Pot Weekly that came out, recently of snow dyeing, that was the first time I had used stroll in the snow dyeing versus I'd done roving and I'd done wool, but I think that it was all 100% wool versus a superwash nylon. And so, I mean, I totally hope we get a lot of snow so that way I can do some more snow dyeing this week. Maybe it takes a while because it takes about 5 hours for the snow to melt when I do it, but it's sort of a set it and forget it kind of thing. And so I think it's fun. Let's see. More on the line of speckles versus self-striping, basically dyeing the same yarn colorway at different times, days, ending up with almost the same colors. Yes. Okay. Yeah. So these colors are, it's funny. When I look at this without looking at the stroll, I look and I see, these colors, it's reading a lot more pastel on camera, but parts of it, just like this green, just feels neon. And so it's fun. Ooh, get a snow cone machine. Woo! I think that would be a little hard for me to justify buying, but maybe. I mean, I could. Yeah, crushed ice. I think would work great as well. But look at this section. So it looks, stripy, and the colors will stripe through. But I think if you want to get a true self-striping yarn, using a blank isn't necessarily the way to go. Now, the homemade blanks, like the one that I used here, with those thinner sections of color, if you were to paint it, with stripes that were reasonably thick, you could get something that actually reads as self-striping when you knit with it, because the interchange sections where you end up with like some color mixtures of like green, blue, some of those would be smaller, but it's something that you would need to play around with, and it's a little harder, I think, with a circular blank than a flat one. But even the stripes that I painted on the flat one, definitely once I had finished it, I was like, oh, some of these curved a little bit, so it's not perfect. But I really want to do on a commercial blank a striped pattern with thinner stripes, and so then I can unravel it myself and see kind of how they turn out. The snow cone machines are only $20 at Toys R Us. Okay, that's not so bad. The 40 stitch machine is the Michaels loops and thread one. I see. Yes. So if you want to repeat your colorways, then that's sort of one of the reasons why I started keeping track of all these dyeing projects on the blog. And you can see I count the drops of food coloring that I use. So that way, if I wanted to try to replicate the color, or if you wanted to try to replicate the color, then the materials I have. And so in some of the more recent videos, I've started to really measure more the amount of water that I put on the stovetop. And versus, when I started off, I would use a splash of vinegar, and I'm actually measuring it so that way I can try to reproduce things. But even if sometimes there's things that I want to really reproduce, I usually have so many other things I've never tried before I want to do that's sort of the direction that I end up going. You have to get to work. Yeah, have a wonderful day. Thank you for joining me today. I've seen folks have frozen Kool-Aid in cube trays and use the cubes to dye with. Yeah, that's something that is definitely on my list as well. I think that one benefit of making your own ice cubes, and of course you're not limited to Kool-Aid, you could use any food coloring, is that you can make them really a lot more concentrated in color than, say, those clear plastic tubes with popsicles in them. I mean, I have some of those. I plan to dye with some of those. I just haven't done it yet because, the fall, I guess, got away from me. But yeah, I think that I am going to quickly do an ad insertion, drink a little bit of water, and then we'll do some chat and conclusions. So I will be right back. Of course, some of you might still be seeing me right now as I drink my water. My awesome Wellesley alumni water bottle that they gave me for going to reunion. So it has like a nice little clip. Not that I have anything to clip it to, but the little clip is pretty nice. I see. Okay, so I don't know if you're done, and so if the ads are done playing, but so Anne, I see that you're looking to do like a reproducible multicolored yarn versus a solid, and wondering how to write that down. So, I mean, I think one thing that would help with that would be, you know, taking pictures in progress, and so, or even if you were doing like one section, you know, measuring, okay, this section was an inch long, and then I'm doing, you know, or knowing how wide the different color sections were if you wanted to repeat, because again, so now that I've been filming more videos, I don't necessarily write down because I sort of say the what I use and when I'm mixing, but I do have a colorway that I sort of want to reproduce, and so maybe that's something that I will have to do, and I'll have to do like a throwback live stream, and I'll work at redoing the. So I dyed this yarn on in a live stream on I Love Yarn Day that I used, I think, Wilton's Black, Royal Blue, and Violet. And I had the colors really concentrated, and it's the first time I really got black. Now there's some like more brown, but there's a section where it looks black, like legit black. And that yarn was very, very popular. And so it's something that I want to potentially try to reproduce. So maybe I'll go back and see if I can get something kind of close. Down, not done. Yeah. So I think that using, I think keeping track of like, are you dividing the yarn in thirds? And, when in the early ones, so my first 100% wool colorway, I say, you can see I kept track because I was using food coloring drops and Kool-Aid. And I kept track of, I mixed the Kool-Aid in a cup of water and I added 20 milliliters to 1 cup. And I really kept track of the proportions that I did. So if in terms of mixing the individual colors, that's something that can help. But there's a reason why, in terms of getting an exact match, that's something that is a little harder with a hand painted yarn, because there's a reason why there's typically dye lots, because if you add a little more dye, the color could be slightly brighter or darker or paler. So there can still be some variation, but independent dyers who have Etsy shops keep really, really careful track of their recipes. And so, if they have a color that they call, blue number 2, I'm not very good at naming colors. If they have the blue number 2 colorway that they mixed, with a couple different dyes and stuff and make a semi-solid yarn, they have oftentimes they have little books with swatches of this color was with this proportion, a 3-to-1 proportion of these 2 blues from Jacquard acid dyes, and I mixed with a 1% stock solution. And so they take a lot more care that the stock solutions that they use everything is well dissolved, so that way they can accurately reproduce colors. Now in my stock solutions with acid dyes, some dyes have crashed out, and I don't really care very much at this point, because I'm more trying to get a feel from it versus trying to reproduce the colors exactly. And so I think that if, I was doing a business and wanted, I was making a color for like a sports team or something and wanted to make sure I hit that hue every time, I would troubleshoot and try some ways, and maybe urea or something else, to make sure that my dye stocks were consistent concentrations so I can measure things accurately. Yes, it is not easy to get black dye with food coloring, mainly because it breaks, and a lot of times it reads as pretty, it can read as pretty red, but there were some sections, and actually maybe, I don't know it. I think I still have one of the yarns because I kept it, but in some sections it's actually read as like a as almost a black. And I forget, so the yarns that I'm talking about were from the I Love Yarn Day live stream. That was sometime, I think in September or October. The videos are on the channel, and there's also a recap of the dried yarns from after the live stream that you can see. And so that's one that, so in the Kickstarter, I had an album and people could, a certain level of backer could pick out the yarns they wanted. And it was the yarn from the I Love Yarn Day that two people wanted. And so that was the only one that was sad because someone didn't get their first choice. When you measure the length of yarn dyed and the concentration of dye, speckles are probably hard to reproduce exactly. Yeah, speckles especially. So if you go to, and she was on the chat earlier, Little Bean, and I think her channel is Little Bean and Me. She does, she has a Etsy shop and sells yarn, and she has a live stream where she was making some of her speckled colorways. And she has colorways that she does again and again. And she was showing her technique of making these speckled yarns. And, you know, in one of them, she's like, oh, I added a little more of this color than I meant to. And so it's kind of a, you know, in reproducing, and again, it's like a dye lot thing. It's like this dye lot of this colorway has a little more of, you know, yellow than the previous one. So it's something that keeping track of would be hard. Now, if you're doing your speckles with sprinkles, it might be a little easier to measure out the number of sprinkles that you have and think about the area to try to have that be a little more of a match. But that's because since the sprinkles are larger, it's a little easier to like measure and distribute them easily versus a finer powder. Say with even doing speckles with Kool-Aid, it could be unless you like do it a lot, I think it would be hard for me to reproduce exactly what I did. Oh, I'm sure that there's a lot of great dyeing classes on Craftsy. I'm wondering, like, you know, so like here I am with a dyeing channel, but sometimes I'm like, ooh, maybe I should take a dyeing class and like learn some techniques, because and I talked about this a little bit yesterday, but my philosophy is very much okay, these are the tools I'm going to use today. This is what I'm going to try. Let's see what we get. And I think that's why, because someone asked me if I've ever been really disappointed in a yarn. And I think that's why I'm usually happy with the results, because I'm not necessarily trying to get a specific yarn, but I'm trying to see if I use this type of dye and this type of technique, what kind of yarn do I get? And so I'm excited to see, you know, with the snow dyeing, I was like, whoa, this almost looks like splatter paint on the blank. That's so cool. And like so much more interesting than I thought I was going to get. Like it didn't look like something I had hand painted at all. And so that was really cool. Now, if I was hoping for like a beautiful rainbow gradient fade of color, then I would have been disappointed because I didn't get something like that. But I was willing to have white patches, and I was excited by those white patches. So it's a philosophy thing. But in terms of, you know, and some of my hand-painted colorways, you know, I could reproduce those. You know, I know, and it's just, you know, I'm normally, also since I don't usually do the same thing over and over on the channel because I like to kind of mix it up for you guys so it's still entertaining to watch. So that's just a bit of like my philosophy about all of this. But you know, there are times when I am dyeing with a specific color in mind. Like when I dip dyed a homemade blank in Wilton's Violet, I wanted to make a hat. And I knew that the hat I wanted to make would use about 60% of all the yarn. So I knew I wanted to try to have the breaking happen so I could hit the three main colors on that 60% of yarn. And somehow it worked almost perfectly. And, you know, that was one of the ones where I don't think I would have been so disappointed if it didn't work out, but it just did. And that was really, really exciting for me. So there are times when I put more planning into my thought before I start dyeing when I want something specific. And then there's other times, you know, there's a time I was dyeing orange yarn to make a hat for Lucas. And the first time it came out and the color just was not dark enough and I wasn't happy. So after it dried, I went and I dyed it again to increase like the depth of color. And so there's no shame in going back again to try to get the color that you really want. Um, but yeah, I'm glad that you guys all joined me this morning for me to unravel these blanks. I strongly considered waiting until the die along week, the week of February 26th, to unravel them to kind of kick off the event. But I want to, in some, especially the pre-filmed videos, I want to have some of the finished yarns in those videos, so you're not having to go and look for like a recap or a second separate unravel. I mean, you can still go and look at this unwinding of the yarns if you want to, if someone wants to check it out, but you can see what the yarns look like in the end after you unravel the blank in the pre-filmed video. So that's why I did this in advance. You learn more from ChemKnits and any other dyeing videos. Thank you. Um, you think it's a great philosophy. Yeah, thank you. Yeah, I think that, and it's funny because like right now I'm in the middle of dyeing yarn with avocados, and when I sign off, I'll probably go and wash those yarns. And that's something that I never would have done if I hadn't received so many questions about it. And it's funny, the first question, it didn't necessarily interest me. The second question, not really. But the more times like I get asked about it, I was like, well, gee, a lot of people really want to know. Maybe this is something that will be pretty cool. And I do think that I will have 3 different colors from 3 different shades from using different combinations of avocado pits and skins. And that's cool. Like, it's really cool. And so you guys, as much as like you guys thank me for my creativity and what I do, a lot of my inspiration comes from you. And so thank you for watching and commenting and interacting. It really, it helps. It helps inspire the content. And, my decision to sort of move more from the written blog to the really focus more on filming these videos. It's been a really fun transition because I feel like I'm actually getting to interact a lot more with all of you directly, and I'm really having a lot of fun. So yeah, thank you guys so much for joining me today. I think that these yarns are really, really cool, and I hope that I get enough snow that maybe I can set up 1 or 2 other snow dyeing videos this, today or tomorrow. Snow dyeing videos are good ones to do while my kids are home because, it's kind of like, okay, set it up and then you wait and you wait. So yeah, again, thank you so much for joining in. If you aren't aware, I'm Rebecca from ChemKnits, and we have a lot of fun and do a lot of dyeing experiments and occasionally have some knitting tutorials here on the channel. And if you have not subscribed, please subscribe to the ChemKnits Tutorials channel. And, if you want to support it, you can also throw a like on the video. These things all help out. And yeah, I don't have another live stream scheduled yet, but usually on Wednesdays I do a live stream, and every Tuesday morning a new episode of Dye Pot Weekly comes out, and you don't want to miss it because there are some really great videos coming up. And starting with the next episode of Dye Pot Weekly, I'm going to start sharing the acid dye videos, the commercial acid dye videos that I know you guys have been really excited to see. Yes, and Little Bean and Me, like she has some, from a more like versus like hobbyist. I think that a lot of what I do is a hobbyist level, and she does more of a, it's still, she has a lot of fun as well. But there was one of the live streams that I found of her speckling yarns that was really helpful and fun. So something that I want to try out at some point. And she also recommended the webcam that I'm using now. Oh, but yeah, anyway, thank you so much for joining me today. And sometimes it takes me a little bit to sign off, but and there's some videos coming out on Friday, and maybe depending on how editing goes tonight, something will come out tomorrow. I don't know. Have a wonderful day, everyone. Bye.